Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, your host, and I'm excited this week to introduce you to Jerry's special guest, Dr. Steven Spector. On this week's episode, we feature Dr. Spector in the latest offering of our series, What's Your Spiritual Story? Jerry talks with Steven about his work as a professor of English, specializing in religions and culture, medieval literature, and the English language, and how his spiritual story is continuing to unfold through the exploration of the Bible as literature. I enjoyed this conversation a great deal, and I'm certain you will as well. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, Steven Spector. Welcome.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good to see you. And, I always tell people that everybody has a spiritual story. Even the atheist has a spiritual story. And for most people, their spiritual story begins at home, in their childhood, and with their parents. That's not necessarily quite the case for everyone. Different people have different stories. Where does your spiritual story begin, would you say?
Well, it's interesting you asked, because I don't remember if I told you over dinner, but when I did the research on my book on evangelicals, the first question I would ask
Yes.
was, hey, would you share your born-again experience with me?
Was that the first question they asked?
No, that's the first question I asked.
Oh, that you asked?
Yeah.
And they did have a story, right?
Oh, everyone, and they were happy to share it. But it also established that I wasn't some uninformed jerk coming around trying to get information without knowing what I was doing. I knew what their experience was, and it established the basis of trust.
And knowing them as people, taking this seriously.
Yeah, right. So my own religious experience, I think it probably begins before I was born, because my grandmother and grandfather came over from Ukraine.
Yes.
And like many Jews in that generation, probably coming over, my grandfather came over in 1905. We have an autobiography written by his father in Yiddish.
Oh, really?
Written after he went blind. My great-grandfather was blind. He was a rabbi. And he learned to crease a page around 30 times and fold it. So he would follow the crease and write in Yiddish. So he tells the story that his children were leaving revolutionary documents around in public. This was around 1900. And they were in danger. And so this is on my father's side. My great-grandfather sent them to New York to get them away from the Tsar's army. And on the other side, my mother's parents, her father was drafted into the army, probably for 25 years in Russia, because that was a fairly normal draft period, 25 years, to try to bring the Jews into a kind of like a neutral social position, so they wouldn't be so identified as Jewish. And while he was asleep one night in his army barracks, an anti-Semite shot a rifle next to his ear.
Oh.
And he was deaf the rest of his life, very hard of hearing.
Oh.
So my journey begins back with them.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And in both cases, it had to do with being Jews, and in different ways.
Yeah.
But the Jews who came from Ukraine, came from Russia proper. In that generation, they cut off their payas, the side curls, and they rejected the rabbis as the authorities in the community. And they tried to become as American as they could quickly. At least the children did.
Right.
Yeah. So I was brought up by the kids who had that experience. My father and mother were the children. My father was the child of the son who was sent away because he was leaving documents around in Russia. And so they became living in Brooklyn. And I don't know, Abigail may know this, but they were in a really kind of stinky neighborhood, literally stinky neighborhood in Brooklyn, called Canarsie. And
my wife taught at Brooklyn College for many years.
Yeah, you may know Canarsie. When the tide was out, you really smelled it. My father's family grew up there. And they're kind of like wise guy kids, except that my father's younger brother was on a Navy destroyer in the Pacific during World War II and was being attacked by kamikaze pilots.
Oh my gosh.
He made a vow that if he survived the day, he would make something of himself.
Oh.
So he became the first one in the family to go to college. He got a PhD, became a pretty renowned psychologist. He founded an institute at Temple University. But my father, who probably was learning disabled, didn't graduate high school.
Really?
So I grew up in a house where my mother grew up with a father who was deaf. And my father's father died when my father was 10.
Yeah.
And they were not privileged in their circumstances.
Right.
And then my mother I told you this, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer when I was 15.
Yes.
Cancer, at Sloan Kettering Hospital. And my father told us that the doctor was this eminent surgeon and said, you get ready, be prepared. She only has a couple of weeks.
Yeah. How sad. What a shocking moment.
Yeah. So my sister was 10, I was 15. My father was a grocer because he hadn't graduated college. He did what he could do.
You're
so
right.
he opened a grocery store. And he was working long hours and he had no way that he could bring us up.
Yeah.
So it looked like our lives would come apart. And there was nowhere to take us.
Yeah.
So I made a bargain with God.
Okay.
Yeah. And you might say that was
tradition of bargaining with God, right?
I wasn't doing it like Abraham, that's for sure. More like Jacob, maybe.
So you decided let's make a bargain.
Yeah. Now, so what does a 15-year-old offer? So I said I would never lie, I would never cheat, I wouldn't steal, and I go to synagogue.
Okay.
And then my mother's cancer went away.
The impossible cancer. I mean, the irresistible, indefeatable cancer.
Yeah, because it was ovarian, was not really treatable by chemo or anything else. The surgeon told my father that he took all the organs out, except he had to leave some things there so he could have something to treat.
Yeah.
So it was that bad. And then she lived another 41 years.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
And this would leave an imprint on a young man, right? Or on any of us when you have that kind of sort of miracle.
I viewed it as a miracle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did my best to keep my part of the bargain. And for another 40 years or so, I went to synagogue and tried my best not to do those things I said I wouldn't do. And then she did die. And I have to admit that I was going to synagogue when it wasn't in my tradition. I wasn't brought up that way.
Okay.
I didn't know the prayers. I wasn't properly trained. I did have a bar mitzvah, but it was really not legitimate. My father owned a deli, and the guy who delivered the Pepsi would go into the basement and teach me some of the prayers.
Okay. So you learned the minimum to get by, and it was accepted.
Yeah, but going to synagogue wasn't really comfortable, but I did do it.
Okay.
And then eventually I started instead of doing it in synagogue, I would hold a service in my own house, in my own room, on Shabbat, and do the reading and things like that. And I always, for some reason, loved the Bible. And and I had the few gifts that I brought with me when I went to do my PhD were an interest in religion and in psychology. So I had started out as a psych major, but decided to be an English major because I could do religion and what I saw as psychology. Because in those days, what you learned as an undergraduate was all behaviorism.
Yeah, so boring. I took that. We ran rats through to chase drops of water. And
exactly.
It just wasted time. But
I trained the quail to jump when we showed the color green.
Okay. Yes. Well, that's a lot farther than I got in it. But I have a feeling in the end, your story could not end as a behavioral psychologist.
No. I decided to add a second major of English. And then since I was since I was in an academic trend, there was nothing else to do but to do a PhD. I wasn't qualified to do anything else.
Right,
So,
right.
when I got to Yale, I found how unprepared I was. I graduated in 3 years with 2 majors, hadn't done much reading in either. I was really struggling that first year, but I did have an interest in religion, and I started to work on medieval Christian Bible plays.
Of all things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I became more or less a specialist in the Bible because, what an editor does. I was editing 15th century Bible plays from northeastern England. And, an editor does everything, answer every question. Who wrote this? When? What is the source? What was changed? What was the author's intention, as opposed to what the scribe wrote? And you get pretty close to the Bible when you're writing about Bible plays.
Yeah.
So by the time I graduated, I was already on a path. I was committed to do the rest of those Bible plays, and a society at Oxford gave me the assignment to do it, which I spent 19 years doing.
Wow.
It was a huge project.
Yeah.
But when I finished, I realized I could do what I wanted to do. So, because I was now tenured. So it actually takes another personal turn. I got divorced after a 20-year marriage.
Yes.
A 30-year marriage, and didn't feel I could concentrate.
Yeah. I've been through a divorce, and it's a very difficult time of life, at least for many of us.
Yeah. I was able to read the sports pages, but that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So I decided I would do an interesting topic. I went to Israel on sabbatical, and a friend asked, "Why don't you write about the Israeli airlift of the Ethiopian Jews?"
Wow.
Because it was an interesting, exciting sort of adventure, and nobody was writing about it. And there was a society that had funded it, and they gave me access for some reason. They trusted me, gave me access to all their unedited notes and intelligence briefings from the time.
In short, before you tell that story, who are the Ethiopian Jews? You might say, why are there Jews in Ethiopia? And what are they like?
Well, the foundational story of the Ethiopians is that the original king of Ethiopia was born to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon.
Oh.
Because that Sheba went to visit Solomon, and he answered her questions, and she went home. But in their foundational myth, he also seduced her.
Okay.
And when she got home, she gave birth to a king, and that meant that, and he brought with him a large number of Solomon's courtiers, and he stole the Ark of the Covenant as well.
Oh, he did? Well, that's very enterprising.
Yes. They believe is still in a church in Ethiopia.
Wow.
And so they believe, all the Ethiopians believe, at least the northern Ethiopians believe, they can trace their heritage to King Solomon.
Wow.
But they got converted, most of them, to Christianity, and then a lot of them to Islam. But a small number, a percentage of them, remain Jewish in their minds. They were black. They didn't know any Hebrew. They only knew the Bible. They didn't know any of the rabbinic traditions, but they believed they were Jewish, and they were the victims of a kind of anti-Semitism, and they fought wars. They fought for their identity. So the Israelis didn't really believe that they were legitimate Jews. There are a number of African peoples who believe they're Jewish. One group in South Africa genetically really is.
Okay.
But this group, it was more dubious. But then there was a rabbi, I think in the 15th century, it was a rabbi looking back to 15th century documents, said that he believes they're Jewish. And because of the rabbinic decision, the later rabbis said that the chief rabbis, the Sephardic chief rabbis of Israel, declared them Jewish. And then in 1990 or so, 1989, politics took a turn. So the Israelis wanted to bring people in.
Okay.
Because the Arab birth rate was high. They were afraid they'd be overwhelmed. And so the Ethiopians were part of that. And the Ethiopians wanted to come. And there was a civil war that was 20-year-old civil war ending just then. And the Ethiopian Jews seemed to be in danger. So the Israelis airlifted them out all in a day and a half, 20,000 of them. Yeah. So that was the story.
And so this was a story it was somehow a turning point for you as well.
Right. Because now I could interview people. I interviewed the former prime minister. I interviewed the people who rescued them. I interviewed a lot of the Ethiopians who were in Israel. So with these interviews, it was a lot better than sitting in the corner of a library.
Yes.
Yes.
You've done that for 20 years, basically.
Right. And I wanted to write on the Bible, but I wasn't in a position to discipline myself that way.
Yes.
So I published that book, and then I was in a position, I knew that it was published by Oxford. I got a good relationship with the editor, the religion editor. So I proposed another topic, and that was the evangelical support for Israel. And it's
an amazing phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it several years ago, at least, had not been much recognized. I don't know at what point it came to your attention. I guess that's about now, but at this point in your story. But
well, I was reading about it. There's a book that's quite popular by a journalist named Gorenberg, an Israeli journalist, Gershom Gorenberg, and he's saying basically it's a bargain with the devil, and that the evangelicals have no real support for you, for the Jews. They just want to convert you. And he was the one, more or less, at first I thought that was what I would find. And I wasn't a journalist, so he sort of tutored me in how to do journalism.
Okay.
And then I found that when I began with this, will you share your born again story with me?
Yes.
And people began to trust me, I think. They began to tell me things that were different from what Gorenberg was saying.
That were different from what?
From what Gorenberg, the journalist,
had published. They give you a story. They're not trying to convert you?
No.
Uh-huh.
No.
What are they trying to do? I mean, what is their interest then in you as they get to know you?
One of them was named Robert Stearns, and he said, look, I'll be honest with you. The best thing that ever happened to me was meeting a Jew named Jesus.
Really?
And he said, I want you to know, I live on the hyphen between Judeo-Christian.
Really? I live in the hyphen between Judeo-Christian.
Yeah. So I said, if I could convert Jews, I would be happy to do it. I'd like to have the same happiness and security that I have.
Yeah.
So, but if no Jew ever converts again, I will continue to support you, and I would die for Israel.
Wow. Well, after hearing you talk, because you came to Abigail's Temple to give a talk about this, we went to a big Christian church that had a rally. We went to two. I think you were at one of them. And was a mind-boggling phenomenon. There was Hebrew up front. There were Israeli flags. There was a evangelical outreach person from a Jewish organization who spoke in evangelical cadences, to the congregation. Learn to do that. And so anyway, it's just an amazing phenomenon. And I
remember that, not only because you and Abigail came to a second talk by me, that was amazing to me, but also because people cried at that meeting.
Yeah.
Because I was saying, the evangelicals are not up to convert you.
Yeah.
They have their own agenda, but it is an agenda that has to do with love and remorse and guilt and gratitude.
Yeah.
So people, I thought that I saw that people were beginning to fear each other less. At least the Jewish group was fearing the other side's intentions less.
Well, when you spoke at Abigail's Temple, there may have been more Christians there than Jews, because Jews were very wary and were disturbed at the thought, because they all had this quite understandable, history behind them, that Christians are the enemy. Your story began with the pogroms and so forth, with Ukraine, which was the center, and Abigail's story did too. That's her heritage. And yet you discovered something completely different when you started interviewing these people.
Yeah. It didn't endear me to the liberal Jewish groups or to the more progressive evangelical groups, because they believe that the evangelicals are committing theological error.
What's the error?
Well, the error would be believing that the Jews that God's promises to the Jews are still valid. And but more particularly, political error, if that God promised the Holy Land, the entire land, from the Jordan to the sea, if he promised that to the Jews and the promise is still valid, then peace talks should not allow the return of any land. So that meant that in the eyes of people like Gershom Gorenberg and others, evangelicals are a danger to the peace process.
Well, okay, that's not exactly a theological insight. That's a kind of, pragmatics of the peace process.
I interviewed political leaders about it as well, including a young congressman named Mike Pence.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mike Pence
from Indiana.
Yeah.
And he said, we would be flexible. They all told me they would be flexible if the democratically elected government of Israel made peace. He said they think it's suicide, but if it's a democratically elected government, they would support it. But their flexibility stops at some point. And Pence told me, and for me, that point is the province. It's the borders of Jerusalem.
Oh, really?
No compromise on Jerusalem. So Pence was one of the figures who was active in the last year in Trump's decision to recognize all of Jerusalem, at least all of West Jerusalem, as Israeli, and then the peace plan, which gives all of Jerusalem except for some suburbs to Israel.
Yeah. But back to your spiritual story.
Right. Well, I think that I gave talks. I gave sermons at the local Hillel, for 20 years on high holidays.
Yes.
On my reading of the Bible, because now I was really enjoying teaching the Bible, and it came to life for me.
Yes.
And I was giving talks about how I understood it. And then teaching was also very meaningful to me.
Yes.
Because I would get some Jews, some evangelical kids, but a large number of kids who knew nothing about the Bible.
You're teaching in a public university.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not reading the Bible as one's own scripture. Oh, right.
Right. No, we're just reading it as literature. It's an English course.
Yeah, as literature, as a book.
And with some informed discussion about what the Hebrew words suggest behind the English.
Yes.
Yeah. But asking at every meeting, who is God? And at first I thought it was kind of silly to keep asking it. But as we were moving through Genesis, they began to see that their understanding of God was changing.
Yes.
And some of the things that God says to you in your book.
Yes.
From the beginning, he has a certain experience of being born or coming to life with the creation. And then in his early times, he's more emotional. And we're coming.
I found that shocking of God changing. God has always spoken of as changeless, eternal. That's part of the perfection. Once you're perfect, any change would be less good. But the story that I was told in my prayer experience was definitely of a God coming into the world and taking it from there and learning by interacting with people. And your point is, well, that's the story of Genesis, and maybe of the whole Old Testament, certainly Genesis.
Genesis is a wisdom book, but not in the usual sense of like Proverbs. I think it's a wisdom book about growing up, as I told you over dinner, learning to tell the truth about yourself, showing remorse, forgiving each other, reconciling. I think that's the wisdom it has to teach. But it reaches that point by showing honestly, with real integrity, how the patriarchs fail time and again and behave badly as parents because of their failures.
Yes.
God kind of corrects them in
Yes.
silent, mysterious ways. So they're changing, but he's changing too.
Yes.
The God of the flood is not the God who is correcting Jacob and his sons,
Right.
and putting them through that kind of perfect justice, where what they did to hurt others happens to them, or never rebuking them. It's really different from the God who rebukes. In the flood story, the Babel story, God changes and changes his way of dealing with his human beings.
Yes. Yes.
And the kids were seeing it, and then they got into it. And sometimes they'd express criticism. Like one of them said, I think God is he's a first-time parent, and I don't think he's really doing so well here.
Right, but everybody is a first-time parent.
Yeah.
That's one of the strange things, that every life is shaped by amateurs. The two parents who have no real experience or expertise of this.
Yeah.
And they're learning to be a parent as the child is learning to be a person.
Yeah, but by the end, by the time we see the reconciliation in the miraculous way that God has manipulated events in ways we couldn't see, by the time the brothers get to Joseph.
Yes.
That there's a plan that we had no idea was going on, and they didn't know.
Right.
And that revealing that plan forgives them,
Right.
even though they regress in the next couple of chapters, because human beings lose their lessons. That's one of the things. That's one of the joys I've had in this last year, writing this book, being able to read all the stuff I hadn't had time to read because I was doing other things, and some of the really great scholarship, people like guys like Sternberg, and even the early work. Sternberg says something like, all biblical figures lose the lessons they learn with shocking speed.
Oh, really? Yes. Yes.
To a large extent, it turns out he's probably right. But when the kids saw it for themselves, it had kind of, these are English majors who get into it when they see psychological surprise.
Yes.
So for a lot of them, I was hearing that I would hear from them later after they graduated, or hear from colleagues that the kids who took that class felt like they could do anything with literature because they had read line by line and seen the changes.
Yes. Yes.
Now, for me, that has been, I almost became a rabbi, but didn't quite. So for me, that was sort of like the rabbinic work. It wasn't necessarily with Jews.
Yes.
But it was leaving them with a sense of what the Bible really is and who God is in the Bible.
Yes. And it's, in spite of those early and developmental features you're talking about, at least Abigail has this dialogue with members of her own congregation often. They just say, well, people aren't really like that anymore. Those people were very, very different. But every time I turn around, I'm seeing the same kind of people and in the sense, the same kind of God, that we're all learning our lines, and it's an adventure together and a learning experience together.
Yeah. And what I'm seeing when I read in the book, what I came up with is that the patriarchs, I brought to bear some of my psychology background.
Yes.
They're going through some of the clinical signs of what we would recognize. The suffering, especially consider Isaac.
Is that right?
The trauma he goes through. Then the symptoms turn out to be the same symptoms as developmental trauma in current thinking.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah. And is that the key also to a spiritual lesson? I mean, is that part of what enables us to learn from his story?
I think part of it is that this is kind of difficult because what Isaac is put through is extremely cruel.
Yes.
But he's put through it for a purpose.
Yes.
And it's a purpose that God doesn't tell us.
Yes. Yes.
So what I say in the book is, when my students object and start criticizing God, I would ask them to show a little theological humility.
Yes.
And there are things that we are just not beginning to begin. We don't even going to have our brains are like little peas compared to what we see in God. We can see ahead so many moves.
Yes.
And it's playing multi-dimensional chess.
Right.
And so let's show a little humility with it. But for whatever reason, Isaac is put through that, and children in Genesis do suffer.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's a lot of cruelty to children, but Isaac is the one who suffers the most and stays with him.
Yes. Yes.
So, but even Isaac becomes sort of ennobled at the end, and he blesses Jacob
Mm-hmm.
with a genuine blessing and sends him off.
Yes. Yes. And that reminds me of something, I'm told in God and Autobiography, in my prayers, God does not dismiss suffering. There's this so-called problem of evil, which is, how is it a good God can manage such a world with so much suffering and not intervene and prevent it and so forth. And this question would come up periodically in my dialogues with God. And I would never get what seemed to me like a definitive answer. But part of the answer is there's a larger story. And that was sort of clear behind the screen, you might say. But it was, what is that larger story? Well, one is told in some sense toward the end of God and Autobiography. But one of the keys is that in my prayers, God is not one of these people who wants to say the suffering is made okay, or that it's not really suffering, as some religious traditions say, or it's something to rise above. It's really, really bad. And I think the actual quote is, suffering is as bad as the people who turn against God because of it say it is. So we have to accept that as part of this complex reality of us, the world, and God. And anyway, but let me ask Stephen, at what point did you become aware of God and Autobiography? And
as I said, I just don't remember at what point I saw it. I mean, I found somewhere that you'd written it, and then I immediately ordered it. I know it would have been out a while by that time. So, I put an enthusiastic review up on Amazon.
Well, good for you. Amazon reviews are very helpful to books. And what struck you about the book?
I approached it as an English professor.
Yes.
So as I read the Bible as literature, I was reading it as literature.
That makes sense. For me, it's the voice of God, but people have to read it however they read it and take in what they get from it.
Right. So the question for me is, God in this book, is God a person?
Yes.
Is he a developed character who is distinct enough from my friend Jerry?
Yes. Yes.
For me to accept him as a character.
Yes.
And I think in a lot of ways he is.
Yes.
And the fact that God says things that you personally didn't believe.
That I found very upsetting often.
Yeah.
And
I didn't like every answer, but I respected the answers that God gives you. So when he tells you about Jesus being a unique Son of God and being God as well, it sounded Christian to me, which would mean that, you said that how would Abigail would react to all the suffering the Jews have gone through for what?
Indeed.
Yeah. So on the other hand, when God talks about, I was young then, and and my emotions were strong, I didn't know how to deal with humans, that totally corresponded to my understanding of God from the Bible.
Well, on this Jewish question, which is interesting because I was told those things that sounded like more or less just what Christians believe about Jesus being, uniquely special, let's call it. And so I asked, should I become a Christian? Because I would do whatever the voice of God told me. No, they're a sect. This was what God told me. They're a sect. And at one point, I started to mention the Trinity. Oh, don't go there. That's, Christian elaborate doctrines. And don't go there. I was told to read about Jesus going into Jerusalem, but not Jesus coming out. And I took that to mean, Jesus as we read in the Gospels, and not Christianity, which is in a sense what came out of Jerusalem in the hands of Paul and others. And one day I think it was Seattle maybe, or Portland. I was in the limo back to the airport after some kind of visit, and looked over and saw kind of a nice Christian steeple, and praying. I also encountered Jesus, as you know, in the book. And at that point, I pray to Jesus. And I say, "Is that your house?" And I'm told, "Well, there's some good people there, but they're not very spiritual." That's what I was told. I don't know if that meant Christianity in general or just that particular church, but I asked Jesus, "Well, where is your house? Is that your house?" "No, where is yours?" "The synagogue," I was told. So anyway, I found that I have a surprisingly large number I assumed as soon as Jesus turns up, or those first questions and answers about Jesus that I, from my Christian background, naturally asked, that Jewish readers would simply unplug at that point. But I found that before the book was published, the president of Abigail's Temple then was reading the book online. I was putting excerpts online, to generate interest. At night, if he couldn't sleep, he would go read Some Have Got an Autobiography. And he asked, would I come speak to the temple? Well, I put it off for a while because I didn't want to embarrass him, that I can't say there's no Jesus in this book. But he insisted, and so I did, and I've had a perfectly good discussion and reception and so forth. And I know one of my Jewish friends who's rather learned and knows the Hebrew and as well as Greek and Latin and so forth, found this, it was a healing experience because this Jesus isn't quite the Jesus that, of the image he had beforehand. And so anyway, I don't know, how you processed all of those, but I have been struck by that.
Well, I do teach, Matthew, Luke, John, and Romans, and a bit of Revelation in the course I do on the Bible. And of course, I'm doing it with respect and trying to take exactly the same approach as to the Old Testament.
Yes.
But I think it was Mary who actually put it in a language that I can accept. She was brought up Catholic, but she was brought up in the time of Vatican II.
Okay.
Which was a revolutionary time, and they were having like radical masses in her parents' basement.
Okay.
With a priest who didn't quite agree with the church and everything. Yeah. So she was very liberal. She taught in a parochial school at one point and taught contraception.
Oh my gosh. No, that's radical.
Because the church says you have to have an informed conscience before you make up your mind. So how can you be informed unless you've seen all the points of view? So she had
she found a loophole in doctrine.
Pretty liberal point of view, but she feels that we all have bits of God in us, and Jesus had a lot of it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think, when some of my students sometimes come up to me afterwards and say, what do you really think personally about Jesus? I don't like to privilege myself as the professor, but right. I think he had a lot of God in him.
Yeah. And that's important. And that's important. Well, you be well, Stephen, and Mary be well. And I very much thank you for this interesting interview, and wish you well in everything.
It was a pleasure. And you and Abigail, all the best. Stay healthy.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.